What you are about to hear is the final episode of the Reformed Financial Advisor podcast. And it is the first episode of a podcast that I'm going to call Gentleman Speculator. It's the end of an era and the beginning of a new, and also in some ways, continuation of the status quo. But this will be the final episode of the Reformed Financial Advisor podcast. Do you miss it? It was, in my view, it was time for a bit of a change, a bit of a rebrand. This might be me sort of in my own head or pedantic, but I thought maybe I could title the podcast something a little bit more appropriate to what the podcast actually is, and not necessarily what it is not. But I had found that over the years, nobody really understood the name. I was sort of riffing on a 15-year-old financial blog, Downtown Josh Brown's financial blog. And I don't know if anyone ever really understood that. Eric Sammons one time asked me if I was Reformed Calvinist, which I thought was sort of funny. And I never really gave a lot of financial advice on the podcast. And I never... to this day, I never really intend to. I sort of think that financial advice, when it's done, generally speaking, is kind of pointless. You can't really give general financial advice. It's cheap and basically useless. So we had a good run. The Reformed Financial Advisor is dead. Long live the Reformed Financial Advisor. What's coming next? This is Gentleman Speculator. This is the new name of the podcast. We got a new podcast image. We have a new Substack. If you go to the URL gentlemanspeculator.com, that will take you to the Substack. So feel free to subscribe to that. That's going to be kind of the hub of the podcast. And there's going to be the occasional written piece that I'm going to include on that Substack as well. So enjoy this last episode of the Reformed Financial Advisor, first episode of Gentleman Speculator. My name is Andy Flattery. I am the owner of Simple Wealth Planning, registered investment advisor. All opinions expressed by me and my guests are solely our own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Simple Wealth Planning. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment, tax, or legal advice. Clients of Simple Wealth Planning may maintain positions in Bitcoin and the securities discussed in this podcast. So Zorro was an Irish guy. Did you know this? The real Zorro was an Irish guy. This was a big discovery for me over the summer. I stumbled upon an article called "The Man Behind the Mask of Zorro" about the real life Zorro. The article goes like this. I'll give you the highlights. William Lamport was born in Wexford Town in around 1611. He was the youngest of a noble Catholic Old English family who originally came to Ireland with Strongbow in the 12th century and built a castle at Rosslare. The main branch of the family remained loyal to the Crown of England, but circumstances forced some descendants of minor branches, in common with many Catholic Old English families, into rebellion against the English. William Lamport was educated by Augustinians and Franciscans and later by the Jesuits in Dublin. In 1628, he fell in with a gang of pirates, jumped ship in 1630 and fled to Spain. He got lucky in 1632 when he was recommended by the Marquis of Mancera and was summoned to the court of Spain. Sounds like a good adventure story so far, right? Lamport had begun to acquire a reputation as a ladies' man as well as a swordsman, became a captain in the Spanish army in 1648. He was sent to Mexico to spy on the new viceroy. And in Mexico City, Lamport led a double life. He was engaged to a rich heiress. Despite leaving behind in Spain a mistress and a daughter, he moved in the highest social circles, and all the time he was spying. In 1642, Lamport conspired to overthrow Spanish rule with the help of another viceroy. This viceroy, his wife, it was said, was probably also Lamport's mistress. Lamport was arrested by the Inquisition, which accused him of conspiring against Spain to liberate Indians and black slaves. He was accused of attempting to set himself up as king of an independent Mexico. He spent 7 years in prison. He became a leader of the prisoners. He managed to escape from prison in 1650, but remained in Mexico City, where he plastered city walls at nights with posters denouncing the crimes of the inquisitors. Captured again after a few days, he was jailed again for 9 years. While in prison, wrote many pamphlets, and he also wrote 1,000 beautiful psalms in Latin, was condemned to burn at the stake in 1659. However, his deeds in support of the Indians and the underprivileged made him a hero in the eyes of the Franciscan community of friars. In the people's imagination, he became the hero who struck in the darkness and wanted to proclaim himself king to free the Indians and the black slaves. In his last will and testament, Lamport proclaimed the hope that the time of God's judgment would soon come and the certainty that the Archbishop of Mexico City would be engulfed by the fires of hell. So there you have it. The real Zorro. He was an Irish guy, an Irish nobleman. Here's how this turned into actual Zorro. So in 1872, a retired Mexican general wrote a historical romance. The hero is a revolutionary yearning for freedom, but also a Don Juan searching for true love. So this was kind of a mishmash of the Enlightenment and of the Romantic period rolled into one. The author was a Freemason, so he gave the Irishman a Masonic touch. He also saved himself from damnation by discovering the principle of life, the divine sparkle within all of us, and that for the Masons is symbolized in the letter Z. So that's where the Zorro Z comes from. Now, in 1919, Johnston Macaulay, who was also a Freemason, reworked the tale, giving a new name, and that was Diego de la Vega, alias being Zorro. He shifted the setting from 17th century Mexico City to 18th and 19th century Spanish California, and the myth of Zorro was born. So there you have it, the real Zorro, who became the myth known as Zorro, as we know it today. By the way, it'd be super interesting. Somebody should write the non-Masonic Zorro. I did try reading the original Johnston Macaulay Mark of Zorro novel, pulp novel, by the way. And I have to say, I didn't so much care for it. It wasn't my favorite thing in the world, but the novel was a success. And very quickly, a movie came out based on the novel. And of course, there has been many movies since then. And I'm obviously a Zorro fan, especially now that I know that there is an Irish Zorro. But the 1920 Zorro film, I think it was called The Mark of Zorro, was an inspiration for the creators of Batman. And this is a clip from the last Batman film, The Batman, the Robert Pattinson Batman movie. See if you can find the Easter egg in this clip.
Jesus, look at you, man. What do you think this is? You think you're gonna scare me with that mask and that cape? I'm gonna start crying, and all of a sudden, some big secret's coming out. What are you with Zorro over here?
What are you with Zorro over here? So clearly the creators of the film were giving a nod to the origins of Batman. Doing a little bit of research here, I discovered that in many Batman comics, and I've read some of them, but I'm in no way well-versed on this topic. But Bruce's origin story is that his parents were murdered right in front of him after they saw The Mark of Zorro, that original Zorro film, in a movie theater. Bruce saw Zorro as his hero, so much so that the character inspired him to fight crime in Gotham City as Batman. Zorro was the inspiration for Batman creators Bob Kane and Bill Finger, who took multiple aspects from Zorro and applied them to the Caped Crusader, such as him fighting crime in secret. So here's what I want to say. Obviously, Batman is a comic book. Also a comic book, kind of inspired by pulp fiction, detective stories. Zorro is pulp fiction. This is not like classic literature or something like that. I'm quite aware of this. Outside of America, though, like Sherlock Holmes was pulp fiction in its time. Sherlock Holmes, which is very good. I've been reading some of these stories as well. Holmes embodies the scholar and the sleuth. And I think I have to imagine that Holmes inspired later American hard-boiled fiction. But here's something interesting. Sherlock Holmes was inspired by an American himself. So it was Edgar Allan Poe, the American author, who invented the modern detective story. So my understanding is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle based Sherlock Holmes in part on this character of Edgar Allan Poe named C. Auguste Dupin. And so here we have pulp fiction, we have detective stories, we have comic books. And I think you can see that detective story, kind of hard-boiled pulp fiction ethos in the Batman movie, which, by the way, I like that movie very much, especially like the first half of it. I think it's like the first half is maybe one of the best Batman movies.
Thursday, October 31st. The city streets are crowded for the holiday. Even with the rain. Hidden in the chaos is the element, waiting to strike like snakes. But I'm there too, watching. 2 years of nights have turned me into a nocturnal animal. I must choose my targets carefully. It's a big city. I can't be everywhere. They don't know where I am. We have a signal now for when I'm needed. But when that light hits the sky, it's not just a call. It's a warning to them. Fear is a tool.
Are you out of your mind? Watch where you're going, Grumpy!
They think I'm hiding in the shadows. But I am the shadows.
I'm a fan, and as much as I like the Christopher Nolan Batman movies, I have to say, Robert Pattinson, his Batman voice was better than the Christian Bale Batman voice. And I mean, someone that's smarter than I and more well-versed than I can talk about all the elements that are blended together here. But I guess when I hear that Batman, I kind of see like that synthesis of noir, pulp fiction, detective stories, of course, Zorro. And I like it very much. It's like continuing the legacy of American hard-boiled fiction. So I like those authors like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. Raymond Chandler is the author of the Philip Marlowe novels, and the first being The Big Sleep, which I had a chance to read in the last year here on my deep dive into sort of the hard-boiled fiction detective stories.
You, sir?
Oh, yeah, I'm looking for a good mystery yarn, something off the beaten track, like the Maltese Falcon.
Oh, that was a fascinating story. But here's one that has everything the Falcon had and more. It's Raymond Chandler's latest bestseller, The Big Sleep. What a picture that'll make.
You mind if I look at it? Huh.
So that, of course, is Humphrey Bogart, the actor in the film version of The Big Sleep. And what you just heard was part of the theatrical trailer, I guess, the miracle of YouTube. But now what I want to do is I want to focus on the chivalric aspects of these archetypes. I want to dwell on a concept called the Noblesse Oblige. the Noblesse Oblige, which as a society is sort of only okay to talk about when it's done in superhero movies. It's kind of unfortunate, but like Spider-Man has got the most obvious example of the Noblesse Oblige that everyone's aware of. And I think that's the Spider-Man line of with great power comes great responsibility. I'm sorry to have to resort to Spider-Man talk here, but that's where we are. But it's the noble gentleman, the aristocratic hero, the chivalric detective even who operates in secret, is not only an amalgamation of thousands of years of myths. Somebody could tell me more about all the myths that are encapsulated in these figures here, but it's part of our, I think, American myth. This is not just a European thing. So flattery here is not merely just, LARPing for Victorian England, or as somebody told me on Twitter, medieval times. But I'm saying Americans can be gentlemen as well. I'm trying to give myself the license to do this. So Noblesse Oblige. There was an article in I Am 1776 that talks about the Noblesse Oblige in Bruce Wayne, so in Batman. And the example that the article uses is actually that final Christopher Nolan movie, The Dark Knight Rises. So in the movie, the Selena Kyle Catwoman character is trying to convince Bruce to run from the danger facing his people, to turn his back on Gotham City and flee with her. I mean, that sounds kind of like something that we would mostly celebrate today, right? But does Bruce do that? No, of course, Bruce does not. And what happens is this scene right here.
I'll open that tunnel, then I'm gone.
There's more to you than that.
Sorry to keep letting you down. Come with me. Save yourself. You don't owe these people anymore. You've given them everything.
Not everything. Not yet.
So there we have Christian Bale putting Anne Hathaway in her place. And, Bill Simmons has that line where it's, are we sure the Chiefs are good? Are we sure the Bills are good? And maybe we have to ask the question, are we sure Anne Hathaway is good? Anne Hathaway, I don't know. I don't know if that Catwoman is aged very well. But this article from I Am 1776, it makes a digression here that I think is appropriate to dwell on. The article says, the modern oligarch seeks to purchase indulgences through philanthropy, establishing foundations and launching initiatives to make the world run more efficiently. But this is the exact opposite of Noblesse Oblige. True Noblesse Oblige never promotes itself the way billionaires promote their philanthropy, hiring journalists and PR firms to laud them while also taking massive tax breaks for their trouble. Virtuous acts are noble, writes Aristotle, and are done for the sake of that which is noble. Oligarch philanthropy, therefore, is at best a questionable caricature of it. And so this is relevant. I've talked about this before, but never as articulately as others. Peter Thiel, who was very interesting on that episode he did with Rogan, addressed this very thing. He was calling it, I think, left-wing philanthropy or something like that. Let me play that Thiel clip for you because I thought he stated it very well.
There's something about, maybe it's just my hermeneutic of suspicion, but there's something about, there's something about the virtue signaling and what does it mean? And I always think this is sort of a America versus Europe difference, where in America we're told that that philanthropy is something a good person does, and if you're a Rockefeller and you start giving away all your money, this is just what a good person does, and it shows how good you are. And then I think sort of the European intuition on it is something like, wow, that's only something a very evil person does. And if you start giving away all your money in Europe, it's like, Joe, you must have murdered somebody, or you must be covering up for something. And so there are these two very different intuitions, and I think the European one is more correct than the American one, and probably there's some history where, the sort of left-wing philanthropy peaked in 2007, 2010, 2012, and there's these subtle ways, we've become more European in our sensibilities as a society.
So are you seeing the point yet? So I know that these are myths, American myths. We're trying to find the real Zorro, but in reality, Zorro is a myth. Of course, it's pulp fiction, but it's sort of part of the American tradition, if you want to call it that. But what do we have here? We have these elite figures, these superheroes practicing the Noblesse Oblige in secret. And so that's part of our American tradition here. It's also the legend of St. Nicholas putting money in the shoes of these three virgins so that they wouldn't have to sell themselves to prostitution. St. Wenceslas, good St. Wenceslas, similar thing. He would sneak around at night and give gifts and money to people in need. And so this is the practice of the Noblesse Oblige that's done in secret. And we can call this part of the American ethos here as well too. So there we have it. We've got Zorro, we've got Batman, we've got it's hard-boiled fiction, which is kind of wrapped up in this, in that Sherlock Holmes is sort of the gentleman sleuth and the gentleman scholar, kind of wrapped into one. There's one more that I want to talk about that I like very much, but most folks have never heard of it, and it's this guy from Neil Stephenson. So Lord Alexander Chung Sik Finkle-McGraw. This character was the fictional adopted Iowa boy turned nobleman in Stevenson's The Diamond Age. Here's the story on this. So while a youth studying engineering at Iowa State, which is my alma mater, so of course I've got to talk about this guy, he witnessed firsthand the decency of his flyover country neighbors in response to a devastating flood. Observing how this event contrasted with the looting and social unrest that plagued other parts of the country, like the Los Angeles riots, he concluded that some cultures were in fact superior to others. This perspective, which is provocative in today's terms, shaped his embrace of neo-Victorianism, which is a fusion of traditional values, a hierarchical social structure, impeccable tailoring, and hyper-cool technology. Both an innovator and a conservative, Finkle-McGraw elevated the traditionally less noble field of engineering to the status of gentlemanly pursuit in the building up of the Diamond Age, a world where authenticity and craftsmanship become the new currencies in a post-scarcity society. So I like this character too. Neil Stephenson, you've got the Iowa connection here. You've got this neo-Victorianism. Unfortunately, I have no clip to share with you. That there will never be a movie made of the Diamond Age. I can't imagine that being the case. These books are way too long. They're way too complex. Every Neil Stephenson book, I think the Diamond Age is one of the shorter ones. But here I want to introduce, I think this leads us into finally the Gentleman Speculator, which is the concept here of this episode. And I'm going to read you a piece that you can find linked in the aforementioned Substack, and it's called On the Gentleman Speculator. Here's what I say. In our own days of investing nihilism and actual nihilism, the Gentleman Speculator emerges. He is a hero for guys stuck in fake jobs, liberal arts majors with no jobs at all, index investors turning off their brains, and gamers trading digital blips on a screen. Similarly to how Lord Finkle-McGraw elevated engineering, we might attempt to restore some nobility to financial investment, not as a mere means of personal enrichment, but as a tool to thrive in an era where pragmatic elites dominate finance and finance pulls the strings. By engaging in capital deployment purposefully, a gentleman aims to challenge power dynamics and contribute, even if it be in a small way, to the defense of civilized peoples. The gentleman speculator is duty-bound. He is astute, hard-boiled, discriminating, patient, long-term oriented, but acts decisively when the time is right. While financial nerds are confined in silos, spreadsheets, pure quantitative analysis, our hero is multidisciplinary, well-read, performs deep fundamental research, and thinks independently. Likewise, a gentleman speculator is in the real world, sleuthing, gumshoeing, an active observer, making qualitative observations not found on Reddit, Twitter, or in Fed tea leaves watching. I think a lot about how we are to act in a time of postmodern investing angst. Investors, after all, are encouraged to cultivate a lack of curiosity, to blindly throw money at the market, and or just let BlackRock handle it. But I suspect there are some who have earned the right to trust their own good judgment. They know that modern portfolio theory is not sacrosanct, or that people, companies, and products cannot be minimized to a Morningstar style box. Just as some cultures are objectively greater than others, some men are objectively better at judging an investment than a monkey throwing darts. It is well known that a speculator is often disparaged by the financial media and the Elizabeth Warrens, of course. This is why he owns the moniker. And true enough, a gentleman typically purchases for the purpose of ownership and not to sell. However, if today's market participants, whether buyers of common shares or holders of Bitcoins, are labeled as speculators, so be it. The reality is that a gentleman speculator acts in probabilities instead of predicting exact outcomes. Unlike those visitors of gambling dens, he eschews fast money. He understands that investment is more art than science, a balance of intuition and analysis. In the aftermath of success where others flaunt, the intelligent investor reflects on Graham's paradox, that investments and speculations are often discernible only in retrospect. And there I'm referring to Benjamin Graham, straight out of his classic work, The Intelligent Investor. So lest you think that flattery is off his rocker here, he's way out in left field, inventing innovations here on what speculation actually is. That's not what's happening. Benjamin Graham has essentially talked about the same thing. And there are ways to defend speculation in the very narrow sense, pure speculators, like people that are just purely buying and selling. Maybe at some point I will do that. That's not really my purpose here. I'm really defending speculation in the broader sense. And the broader point here is that, criticism of finance, it feels edgy, right? It feels good to rage about these generic ideas, finance and the banks and the financial system. But I think when these accusations aren't specific, I question how useful they are. Except to suck up to leftists or socialists or the commies or, so on and so forth. And I also have to ask, how is it going for you? In my view, money is a tool. If you aren't using the tool, are you finding that you're having success in accomplishing what you'd like to accomplish? That's my little sermon. So money is a tool. Okay, so there you have it. There's Andy's little idea board here, my Pinterest board. How is any of this relevant? It might be the question that you're asking. Obviously, when we're talking about something like the Noblesse Oblige, you can practice the Noblesse Oblige. Those of us that are, bestowed with a lot of gifts can practice the virtue of magnanimity. So be a gentleman. Be one who practices these virtues. Be a billionaire. Be a billionaire hero who looks out for a community. You can do that. But here I'm actually talking about, when I'm saying gentleman speculator, I'm actually talking about something even more practical. And the first is this idea of investing the last liberal art, which is a book title that some of you might be familiar with. It's based on the ideas of Charlie Munger and his sort of lattice work investing concept.
Philosophy, in so many different levels, from William James pragmatism to Wittgenstein's theory of language, and how it impacts descriptions, explanations, and narratives, is hugely important to be a successful active manager. When Amazon came out, Bill and I, owned Amazon at the IPO. And two things were going on simultaneously. One is that Bill had made a ton of money in the 1990s owning Dell Computer, which was a direct distributor of personal computers to individuals, and he sold at prices below, Compaq, Hewlett Packard, Gateway. And you bought them over the 1-800 number. You got your credit card that night in the bank account. They didn't have to pay the chip suppliers or the monitor keyboard for 30 to 60, 90 days. And so he basically had a wonderful business of growing the business on the accounts receivable of his customers, what ultimately became negative working capital, and the very first company to generate 100% return on capital. So that stock went up 10,000% in the decade of the 1990s. When we went into Amazon, a couple of things were going on simultaneously. When we did the work on Amazon and Bill, talked to Jeff Bezos, Bill asked him, what is the business model? And Jeff said, well, it's kind of like Dell, which is, I get books. I sell books, but I don't have to pay the publisher for 90 days. And sometimes I can give the books back with no penalty. And so when Jeff began to describe, so he's describing his business as something in Dell, we knew we were home free, right? We just said, well, this is a wonderful business model.
So that is Robert Hagstrom, the author of Investing: The Last Liberal Art. And when he's saying Bill, he's talking about Bill Miller. And in Hagstrom's view, Bill Miller is the best example of a practitioner that has essentially taken the Munger concept of lattice work investing, of basically being multidisciplinary, reading broadly, and applying that, practically speaking, to investing. So Bill Miller is a great example of that. And I needed to do a little crash course on Wittgenstein, so I thought maybe I'd share that with you as well. And what I found was David Foster Wallace has written a little piece on Wittgenstein. And here it is. So this is from David Foster Wallace, in case you're wondering what he was referring to with regards to the philosophical idea. Foster Wallace says, Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations proved in the 1950s words actually have the meanings they do because of certain rules and verification tests that are imposed on us from outside our own subjectivities by the community in which we have to get along and communicate with other people. Wittgenstein's argument, which is admittedly very complex and gnomic and opaque, basically centers on the fact that a word like pain means what it does for me because of the way the community I'm part of has tacitly agreed to use pain. This means that questions about our national consensus on grammar and usage are actually bound up with every last social issue that millennial America is about. Class, race, gender, morality, tolerance, pluralism, cohesion, equality, fairness, money, you name it. So that's David Foster Wallace there. And I think what I understand, if I understand what Hagstrom's saying here, is he's saying the reason why the study of philosophy is applicable to this concept of like investing in Dell or investing in Amazon was that Amazon was giving a name for what it was. The consensus was the business model of Amazon was Barnes and Noble, or it was Walmart. The consensus had misunderstood. Now we know this, of course, in retrospect, what Amazon was. Now, it sounds to me like Bill Miller understood right away what Amazon was. He was able to see what the truth of what Amazon was and sort of avoid the rhetoric or the meaning of these words. So the name was inaccurate. If you appreciate Wittgenstein, I think here, you could have figured out these characterizations aren't necessarily true. So the edge that you had was not an informational edge. I mean, Bill Miller had the same information, I imagine, as any analyst that was looking at this business. And we're always told, of course, it's impossible to have an edge, especially an informational edge. But it's the contrarian point of view here. The contrarian point of view here of Bill Miller and sort of this way of thinking broadly, and maybe a philosophical an idea of being open to philosophy that gave Bill Miller the insight to be able to take advantage of that opportunity. So Hagstrom continues here.
But then you go to the market level, and how was the market describing Amazon when it initially came out? They describe it as Barnes and Noble, a brick and mortar superstore that sells books. And they looked at the accounting factors, which is a stupid way in which to analyze businesses, just accounting factors alone, and said, the price earnings multiple is lower. The price to sales is lower in Barnes and Noble, and it's way too high in Amazon, so you should, buy Barnes and Noble and sell Amazon. Well, that didn't work out too well. that wasn't a very good way to do it. And then it started doing, appliances and, CDs and furniture and all these things. And they say, oh, no, it's not Barnes and Noble, it's Walmart. So description of Amazon is Walmart. So you should do a pair trade, go long Walmart and sell Amazon. Oh, well, that was a horrible investment to make because the description was totally wrong. But those that understood AOL is kind of a Dell business model, understood that, something that earns 100% return on capital could be priced at 50 times earnings and still be undervalued where the market thought it was grossly overvalued. Well, that all leads back to Wittgenstein, right? And so clearly, the study of philosophy has made a lot of money for guys like Bill Miller.
So there you have it. Bill Miller, the gentleman scholar, the gentleman investor, from Robert Hagstrom talking about this idea of investing, the last liberal art, or latticework investing. Now, Hagstrom has other books. I think his most famous book is The Warren Buffett Way, and a obscure book that he has, or one of his lesser known books, is called The Detective and the Investor. In the last couple of years, there was a more popular book came out called The Sleuth Investor. And here is where we're going to talk about the other side to our little archetype here, the gentleman sleuth, if you will. And an author named Avner Mandelman wrote this book, The Sleuth Investor, and I will let Mandelman introduce the idea here. And this is the other way that we're making this very practical, how this detective work applies to money and investing.
The edge of the sleuth investor is some of the parameters are not categorized. They are not just the numbers of the company. For example, if you know that Steve Jobs just hired the top CEO of Pepsi, and he hired the CEO by shaming him into joining, and this CEO he just hired is going to be antagonistic to Jobs for the next 10, 15 years, is an inbuilt tension that can create a risk that the numbers will not show you. In other words, there are risks not reflected in the balance sheet, the income statement. Taking another simple example, if somebody shows you that Alibaba is very cheap, if you know it's being traded in China, where the top dictator can take the shares away from you, it's a risk not reflected in the income statement. If you have a company in which you know that the CEO has been playing on the side of the secretary, he's going to be sued tomorrow. That's a risk you will not see. These are all trivial statements, but in essence, modern computers who play chess only play from memory, and the memory contains things not in the financial statements.
So do you see how these archetypes distinguish themselves from what we mostly do kind of in modern financial markets or in investing in the modern world? Naive, passive indexing, pure quantitative analysis, algorithmic strategies, degenerate trading. The gentleman scholar, the gentleman sleuth is distinct from both of these models here. And this last piece of advice I'll play for you is kind of the other way that we can make that a gentleman can make this practical. And that is having a low time preference, having a long-term outlook, and always having an eye towards the future. And the way we do that is by staying married. Here it is.
And once you pass some of the smell test, then you can start reducing the number into those you really want to dedicate time to. And I would say 30 or 40% is the picking of the initial worth sleuthing stocks. The rest of it is going to be up close and personal, what they're really, really like, physically like. And beyond that is going to be the effort of to do nothing. If you got a Microsoft or an Amazon or an Intuit or other companies at the beginning of their life, the way to make money is you buy them and you are absolutely sure of them, and you keep sleuthing them year in, year out as you hold them, and then you do nothing. You keep sleuthing as you hold them and you do nothing else. And after 30 or 40 years, you're rich. But it's mostly by doing nothing except sleuthing all along. The new companies that you put in your portfolio shouldn't be very many of them. You should act not frequently, act not often, but when you act decisively and then keep it for long. So as I said, the analogy is the secret of a good marriage is to find the right wife or husband, marry them, and then stick with them for 50, 60, 70 years. All advice is how to pick the right spouse. Very little advice is how to do the stick with it. And sleuthing is both about finding the right stock and marrying it, but also how to stay married to the stock.
And this is the Gentleman Speculator. So our inspiration is Sherlock Holmes, the scholar and the sleuth, but also the homebody and the adventurer, the discerning Philip Marlowe, the Noblesse Oblige of Bruce Wayne and Zorro, who, God forbid, both of them received an inheritance, the aforementioned Lord Finkle-McGraw from Stevenson's The Diamond Age. And in the real world, I mean, the archetype comes to life in Bill Miller, Robert Hagstrom. He's Miller's the generalist practitioner, if you will. Michael Saylor, the audacious visionary we've talked about in previous episodes. Anthony Deedon. I want to do a future episode on Anthony Deedon, but he's ruminating over centuries-old businesses from his Mediterranean yacht. Very interesting guy. Jim Grant is a voice of erudition, and he wrote a book basically defending the practice of speculation. So when I'm talking about there are ways to defend the practice of speculation, Jim Grant did that. He's the guy with the bow tie, by the way. And my visual icon for the Gentleman Speculator is the late actor Alain Delon. He's the image on the new cover art for this Gentleman Speculator podcast. So if you look at your podcast player, you'll see the actor Delon. He's got the suit, the fedora hat, the trench coat, and he's timeless. He is sort of the meme of effortless refinement, and he's going to be the icon for the Gentleman Speculator. And it just so happens, circling all the way back to the beginning here, I saw that Delon, who's a French actor, in 1975 starred in a production of Zorro. And I didn't realize this before going on this little adventure here to create this podcast. But I'll leave you with Alain Delon here in Zorro, and we'll see you next time on Gentleman Speculator.
That's enough, Colonel. If you don't know how to respect a woman, I'll have to teach you.
You're very brave. First you disarm me, then you challenge me.
I'm just a bandit, remember? And a bandit will do anything to get what he wants. I want you on your knees, begging forgiveness from this lady.
You must be mad.
On your knees. Now.
I'm an officer.
You're an insect. Down.
Never.
Colonel, when I get bored with tearing your uniform, I'll cut your heart out. Swear you will never offend her again.
I swear. Please forgive me.
Now get out.
You're leaving?
You'll be safe here.
Take care, please. I am still afraid for you. If only I could help.
You've given me another reason to live and fight. That's help enough. Thank you.
We shall meet again, bandit!